Hi guys! Welcome to the second part of our ultimate vintage drum comparison video. In the first part we played classics by Ludwig, Slingerland, Swingstar and Sonor. For this video again we have a lot of different vintage drums from the eras from the 40s all the way up to the 80s. All drums are recorded with the same mics and preamps and with one exception played with the working horse of snare drums, the Ludwig Supraphonic. You can find all the exact details about the setup and equipment in the description below. So without further ado, let's hear some drums. In our first video, we already talked about the long history of the German company Sonor. Back then, we had a champion drum set from the 70s. We found a real gem for this video. Over the years, the Sonor Teardrop drums have become very popular. Today's set is a new beat kit from this line from the year 1959. It consists of a 20-inch bass drum, 13 and 16-inch toms, and the original 14-inch snare drum. While the shells of the toms and bass drum are made of 3-ply beechwood with reinforcement ring, the snare is made of just 1 ply. From the mid-1960s onwards, these drums consisted of 6-ply shells without reinforcement rings. Ready for the first set of drums? Here we go! When the United States of America entered into World War II in late 1941, metals such as brass, nickel and steel were soon desperately needed for the production of ammunition, airplanes, tanks and other war-related materials. The US government mandated that non-essential, newly manufactured items, such as musical instruments, must be constructed using very little of these important metals. Drum designers went to work and came up with some very creative solutions to the problems of building drums with very few metal parts. The Slingerland drum company met this challenge by introducing their rolling bomber drums. These beautiful drums were made with hand-carved rosewood or walnut lugs along with maple hoops and solid wood snare drum strainers. Floor toms were suspended on wooden legs. These new rolling bombers were fully tunable and the snare drums were built around the famous Radio King solid maple shells. Bass drums and tom-toms were made from 3-ply mahogany and poplar shells with heavy maple reinforcement rings. This set consists of a 26-inch bass drum and 13 and 16-inch toms with the original calfskin heads from the 40s on it. The sound of the kit is really dark and earthy. I've never played a set that is so special. Founded in 1883, Gretsch is one of the oldest American music companies still operating today. And its early history reads like a classic American success story. At the age of 27, German immigrant Friedrich Gretsch opened a music store in Brooklyn, New York, where he made and sold drums, banjos and tambourines. Gretsch quickly became known as an innovator in the field of drum making and changed the face of modern drum production. In 1927, Gretsch produced the Gretsch American Drum Series, the first drums produced with multiply shells, which would become part of Gretsch's signature drum sound and remains so to this day. A wide variety of series like the Broadcaster and round badge drums have come onto the market over the years. And those are now sought after collective items. Today we have a square badge set from the early 80s with a 20-inch bass drum and toms in 12 and 14-inch. The shells are the famous Jasper shells, made out of maple and gumwood. Hayman Drums was an English musical instruments manufacturer established in 1968. The drums were the brainchild of Ivo Arbiter, the first to import Ludwig and Gretsch drums in the UK during the beat boom in the 1960s. The idea was to come up with a drum series to compete with the success of the large American drum companies of the time. The shells were thin-walled birchwood with reinforcement rings and painted white with what they called Vibrasonic interiors. The Vibrasonic interior was simply a thickish sprayed-on coat of ordinary white paint. Its function was to harden the surface of the drum, allowing the sound to bounce inside and give the drums more crack. The lugs were essentially a copy of the Camco design. The company started with the name George Hayman on the badge, then shortened it to just Hayman in later years. Hayman was out of business by 1975. The drums didn't sound exactly warm, but for the mostly unamplified drummers of the time, fitted the bill exactly. They cut through any sort of music at high levels. Our set today has a 22-inch bass drum and toms in 13 and 16-inch. Pearl drums were founded in Japan in 1946. In the beginning, music stands were made and the company switched to making drums in the 1950s. At first, shells were made for over 30 different manufacturers. It was not until the 1960s that these deliveries began to be discontinued and instruments to be produced under their own name and logo. This set from the late 70s consists of a 9-ply fiberglass wood shell made of Luan wood, which is also often called Filipino mahogany. All bearing edges were recut by the German drum maker Mick Scharf, as the fibrous Luan wood could no longer provide an exact tuning over the years. The shells of the 22-inch bass drum and the 13 and 16-inch toms are covered with wrap and satin gold. This set is a real heavyweight, not only because of the metal bass drum hoops. The mixture of wood and fiberglass ensures a lot of volume, which is great for heavier music. It should also be mentioned that these drums are really cheap on the market and they provide a lot of sound. In the 1960s, at the time of the British invasion of beat music, the American instrument market was overwhelmed by Far East copies of established brands such as Gretsch, Slingerland and Ludwig. Most of these drums were made by manufacturers who later became Tama and Pearl. Here we have one of those sets, a US Mercury with a 20-inch bass drum and toms in 12 and 14-inch. The 4mm thin shells are made of cheap Dewan wood. In terms of hardware, no value was placed on expensive and heavy materials as well. All drums are extremely light thanks to thin hardware components. It is noticeable that the bass drum hoops are not even made of wood but plastic. The hardware was largely copied from Slingerland. Not only are the badges similar, the lugs are also very reminiscent of the Sound King lugs, as well as the wing screws on the bass drum, which are modeled on those of the old Radio Kings. These made in Japan kits are very cheap on the market and deliver a surprisingly good sound. I hope you had as much fun watching this video as I did playing the drums. Let us know in the comments which kit you liked the most. If you want to see more awesome videos, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon.